as a kid, and as far back as I remember myself, I always drew and paint. And I used to love watching the marble and granite tiles wherever I will be, in the underground. In Uzbekistan, where I grew up in Tashkent, it's very beautiful. They use real stone in quarries, so no shortage of this very precious stone. Some buildings, or even tiles in the bathroom. You just look down and see the shapes, abstract shapes, and in no time some scene would be born out of these shapes. Some feature, some character, a battle, a rider, a face, a flower, an animal, a dragon, a rabbit. You all know that when you look at the clouds passing by, or some abstract formations of sorts, vegetation, in a landscape. And the eye likes to recognize likes to lock it into a meaningful content. Psychologists are notoriously working with this by giving people this test on what do they perceive when some abstract shapes are shown. Later on, already as an artist, as a young painter, I was reading Leonardo da Vinci's tractate on painting. And I remember how this great Renaissance figure would advise a painter, if suffering with a stumbling block, to take a piece of cloth and dip it into the bucket of paint and simply toss it against the wall. And whatever will appear on that wall, let that be an inspiration. Literally. The author of Mona Lisa, the guy who entertained the first flying experiments, humans killing some along the way, accidentally. An extraordinary man in every way. Just that, dipping a cloth into a bucket of paint and throwing it at the wall. Whatever will be an imprint will give birth to something. Something that then I can extract. And let that be an inspiration, as the master has said in his writing. And of course, I did exactly just that. There was a period, that distinctive phase, when I came out of the academy of St. Petersburg, where I was all but a military almost discipline of drilling, the classical way of painting, composition and drawing, from all the examples available there at the academy. And there was this great need to purify myself, to free myself from all that was learned in my first years as a young painter, now independent, in Warsaw, tried to make a living in the first experimental works. I would do just that, literally. I forgot about Leonardo's tractate, but there were many, many works of art were born out of that, not knowing what the painting will look like eventually, but being fully equipped with that swelling desire that would be the driving force, the motivation. I knew I want to express myself. How and what? I had no idea. And this is precisely where the thrill of it was. It wasn't conceiving something and then going and coldly executing it. Far from it, because I knew how to do it. And that's what made me feel I need to go in the very opposite direction. Knowing how to do things felt, well, done it. Been there, done it. So, literally, dipping in a cloth into a bucket of paint, and there we go, would be beginning of the process. This analogy here perhaps can serve as an illustration to how consciousness itself works. There is this extraordinary insights into the way how awareness expresses itself, which is summarized in 4 levels of speech, known in Vedic and Tantric thought as para, pashyanti, madhyama, and vaikari. 4 levels of speech. These 4 levels of speech is apparently how awareness communicates itself, its own expression and expressive potentiality through an act of bringing something forth through manifestation. And so it is distinctively different stages in the process. At the level of para, it's undifferentiated. At the level of para, at the level of that cosmic divine speech, everything is in a state of complete and utter equilibrium, equipoise. Nothing could be said about it. It is in a state of the beyond, hence para. And then it moves as if swelled by this internal propensity into what then is known as pashyanti. And pashyanti, it is that impulse to create, the impulse to express. But it is not knowing yet how it will express. Everything is in a state of pure potentiality, molten, just as the metal, precious metal, gold, molten to liquid state for it to be cast in any ornament, in any shape, any form. It is just that, pure magma of whatever may come. And then it breaks down, it begins to break down with tremendous force and tremendous speed at the level of madhyama, that middle. So from pashyanti to madhyama, it's as if some kind of forces are at play when it begins to rush into, just as in what would later be known as the laws of nature. Water rushes down the hills and mountains, causing these streams and creating rivers and floods the valley, as what we have witnessed just now in the aftermath of this, what brushed across these 4 or 5 states here where we find ourselves now. It aches to become something. It aches to cast itself into some form. And that process becomes fully articulated at the level of vaikari. At the level of vaikari, it becomes fully actualized, articulated. So therefore it is known as that manifested level of speech, which belongs to expressed through language, whether in writing, in thought, or in deed, with the help of vocal cords. These examples of that uncertainty, these examples of that, what Leonardo was advising as an exercise to overcome inertia of a writer's block, to make or help one move from the place where one is stuck, is of tremendous importance if we are to apply this analogy here in relation to the processes of how awareness creates in the first place. And who knows, perhaps we find ourselves precisely in this moment in time when awareness indeed dipped something in a bucket of cosmic paint and threw across the skies whatever the imaginary wall there is for us to recognize shapes of things to come. Because that's how it expresses itself. This is the language of consciousness. It can fancy itself into whatever it will recognize in the myriad of possibilities. This is what we're talking about. that kid I was staring at a polished slab of marble or granite will see a whole battlefield. Riders, infantry, all in that. And you change the position, suddenly all this is changed into something else. This is extraordinary. Reflect on this. This is extraordinary. This is how reality is being formed, shaped, given form. It doesn't exist. There's no form out there, even if temporarily perceived as such. This is the realm of Maya. This is what Indian spirituality here have been speaking for millennia. Maya, this matrix we live in, seductively confuses us to take all this at a given, as if it is always as it is. It is never. It is always subject to our perception. Whatever we are able to perceive in this constantly moving flux of things, of shapes yet to come. So this, what I feel like perhaps addressing and bringing forth as a reminder to us both as that impromptu entrance into the immersion where, as you have realized by now, hopefully, there's no cast-out theme prepared to deliver, but rather giving ourselves this freedom to improvise along the way whatever comes forth, whatever we recognize in myriad of all that would present itself. And at the very same time, may this serve, perhaps, as a reminder that where we find ourselves as human beings in this drama of creation, at this precise moment in time, is such where that whatever we are to pick up in these shapes and forms, abstract yet, not concretized to the eye and the mind, is very important. Because it is that what as that whole beautiful analogy of living in the mind of the seers who have conceived this reality for us that we entertain. And perhaps that time is exhausting itself. There have been these thoughts expressed, these suggestions, that we are given the trajectory already. We were given the trajectory. These great seers have foreseen for us how we are to live as earthlings. With all the epics, with all the battles, with all the Kurukshetras and Ramayanas, with all the Gilgameshes, down the line, along the long corridor of history, we find ourselves when we are perhaps to cast out our own destiny from this moment in time. Who knows? All this is, but of course, a speculation. And that being said, if we don't exercise this possibility that is so apparently has been out there by extraordinary beings who have broken away from how we have conceived ourselves to be in terms of what the science was almost 100 years ago already, where the reality is not as straightforward as it seemed. Reality is a constantly changing phenomena. This quantum soup, this quantum reality that we all share and partake, has this extraordinary way of how each and every one of us influence that reality. So that fabric of awareness that we all share, this matrix, is not exist by itself outside of our perceptions, outside of our heartbeats, outside of our frequencies. But all this works in unison. either with harmony or subject to tremendous degree of disharmony. Hence the dilemma of being alive today. Perhaps, who knows, more so than in some other, let's say, more relaxed phases in history. Remember how these questions, right, these 15, whatever, like 1 minute or 15 minutes, these key questions, like you are a guest of this program or this or that show. It's like, pick any time in history, what would that be that you'd like to be born? Right? What would that be? And all of us go, oh yeah, maybe, I don't know. Yeah. You know what's tricky? If you really know history, like in all its encompassing way, it's very tricky to pick a point. Very tricky, at least a known history. At least the history that is recorded. Because it's one heck of a mess throughout the millennia. You want to find the most peaceful, the most, let's say, harmonious time when we have coexisted as earthlings. Will not be an easy job to do. Unless we fantasize, well, maybe golden age, but there are no fossil records, no trace records. It's just somewhere in the recesses of our memory as a possibility. Where do you want to be born? Time of Rumi? Yeah, apparently it was beautiful. Had to flee Mongol hordes all the way from Balkh to Anatolia, running for his dear life. All the intrigues of the Sultanate. Cannot even have an open friendship with Shams, his mentor and his best friend, right? Any time you pick in history that you fancy, you'll find yourself, if you truly look into what that is, that none is better than the other. So perhaps the time that we are born right now is one and the only time that we should pick, if you happen to be in that breakfast show where you have to quickly give an answer. What's the best or most favorite time you would be born? How about now? So let this be that suggestion, that thrown in proposition, just that cloth dipped in the bucket of paint. Whatever is dripping down the wall, pristine white wall of a canvas or alabaster, whatever is imprinted there. And let us look into that attentively and begin to see and recognize what do we want to bring forth into what would become our reality. Because this seems the language of consciousness itself. We mold ourselves. We literally create the reality by virtue of perceiving that reality somehow, whether we are aware of it or not. And that's where the main dilemma is, whether we are aware of it or not. So if we are, as it were, not aware, then the reality will still have to be brought forth. It's unstoppable. These 4 levels of speech have that unstoppability about it. It has to proceed that trajectory. It has to begin to collapse from that what the molten state of pure potentialities, it has to begin to break down into something more concrete, already at the level of madhyama, let alone when it reaches the level of how mind organizes it all.